The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Braxton as Sergeant Marcus Thompson walked his usual patrol route along the eastern perimeter fence. 23 years of military service had taught him to notice everything. But what he saw that Tuesday morning made him stop dead in his tracks. A woman sat huddled against the chain-link fence, wrapped in what looked like old newspapers and torn blankets. Her gray hair hung in matted strands around her face, and her clothes were so dirty and worn that their original colors were impossible to determine. She appeared to be in her 60s, maybe 70s, and she was clearly homeless. Marcus had seen plenty of homeless people during his time in the military. They often gathered near military installations, hoping for food or shelter. But this woman was different. She sat perfectly straight despite her obvious exhaustion, and there was something about the way she held herself that reminded him of military bearing. "Ma'am," Marcus called out as he approached the fence. "You can't stay here. This is military property." The woman looked up at him with startling blue eyes that seemed far too alert for someone in her condition. She studied his uniform, her gaze moving from his name tape to his rank insignia with the precision of someone who knew what she was looking at. "I understand, Sergeant," she said quietly. Her voice was hoarse but clear. "I was just resting." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Most homeless people would have been defensive or argumentative. This woman spoke like she was addressing a subordinate, despite her appearance. There was an unmistakable tone of authority in her voice that made him stand a little straighter. "Are you a veteran, ma'am?" Marcus asked, his tone softening slightly. The woman's lips curved into what might have been a smile. "You could say that." Before Marcus could respond, his radio crackled to life. "All units. We have reports of an unauthorized person near the east fence. Please investigate and report." "This is Thompson," Marcus responded. "I've located the individual. Elderly, homeless woman. No apparent threat." "Copy that, Thompson. Base commander wants to see anyone found on or near the perimeter. Bring her to headquarters for processing." Marcus looked down at the woman, who had heard every word of the radio exchange. She was already standing, gathering her meager possessions with movements that, despite her obvious frailty, had an odd gracefulness to them. "I'll come quietly," she said, almost as if she were doing him a favor. The walk to headquarters took 15 minutes. During that time, Marcus found himself sneaking glances at his unusual companion. She walked with a slight limp, but her posture remained erect. Despite her ragged appearance, she seemed to know exactly where she was going, as if she had walked these paths before. Other soldiers they passed stared openly. It wasn't every day that someone brought a homeless person onto the base, but the woman didn't seem bothered by the attention. If anything, she appeared to be studying the base itself, her sharp eyes taking in details that most visitors would never notice. "This place has changed," she murmured at one point, so quietly that Marcus almost missed it. "Excuse me, ma'am." "Nothing, Sergeant. Just thinking out loud." Fort Braxton's headquarters building was an imposing 3-story structure that had been built in the 1960 seconds. As they approached the main entrance, Marcus noticed that the woman's pace slowed slightly. For the first time since he'd found her, she seemed uncertain. The lobby was bustling with activity. Officers and enlisted personnel moved with purpose, their boots clicking on the polished floors. Behind the reception desk, Corporal Jennifer Parks looked up as Marcus approached with his unusual companion. "Sergeant Thompson," Parks said, barely concealing her surprise at the sight of the homeless woman. "Colonel Davis is waiting in conference room B." Marcus had expected to meet with the duty officer or maybe a captain. Colonel Davis was the base's second in command, a man who didn't waste time on minor security issues. The fact that he was personally handling this situation struck Marcus as odd. Conference room B was on the second floor. As they climbed the stairs, Marcus noticed that the woman was breathing heavily, but she refused his offer of assistance. Her pride was evident, even in her current state. Colonel Davis was waiting for them, along with Major Susan Chen from base security. Both officers looked up as Marcus and the woman entered the room. Marcus saw Davis's expression change from professional interest to something else entirely when he got his first good look at the woman. "Sergeant Thompson, thank you," Davis said, his voice strangely tight. "Please wait outside." "Sir, shouldn't I stay for the interview?" That won't be necessary. Close the door behind you. Marcus hesitated for a moment, then followed orders. As he closed the door, he caught a glimpse of Colonel Davis standing very straight, almost at attention. It was a posture Marcus had only seen when Davis was meeting with general officers. Outside in the hallway, Marcus found himself pacing. Something about this entire situation felt wrong. Why was a colonel personally interviewing a homeless woman? Why had she seemed to know her way around the base? And why had her voice carried that unmistakable tone of command? 20 minutes passed before the door opened again. Colonel Davis stepped out, his face pale and his hands visibly shaking. Behind him, Marcus could see the woman still sitting at the conference table, looking somehow different. She sat straighter, and there was a new alertness in her posture. "Sergeant Thompson," Davis said, his voice carefully controlled. "I need you to escort our guest to the VIP quarters in Building 7. She'll be staying with us for a few days." Marcus blinked in surprise. "The VIP quarters, sir?" "That's correct." "And Sergeant? This situation is classified. You're not to discuss it with anyone." "That's a direct order." "Yes, sir, but—" "No questions, Sergeant. Just follow your orders." The VIP quarters were typically reserved for visiting dignitaries and high-ranking officers. Marcus had never escorted a homeless person there before. As they walked across the base, he noticed that word was already spreading. Soldiers stopped what they were doing to stare, and hushed conversations followed in their wake. Building 7 was newer than most of the base structures, with well-maintained landscaping and a lobby that looked more like a hotel than military housing. The duty NCO, Staff Sergeant Williams, did a double-take when he saw Marcus approaching with the woman. "Sergeant Thompson, is there some mistake?" "Colonel Davis's orders," Marcus replied, handing over the paperwork that Davis had hastily prepared. "She's to be given quarters and whatever she needs." Williams read the orders twice before looking up at the woman, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. "Ma'am, if you'll follow me, I'll show you to your room." The woman nodded and turned to Marcus. "Thank you for your courtesy, Sergeant. You're a credit to your uniform." There was something in the way she said it that made Marcus feel like he'd just received the highest commendation of his career. He watched as she followed Williams down the hallway, noting again that despite her ragged appearance, she moved with an unmistakable dignity. Marcus returned to his duties, but the encounter stayed with him throughout the day. During his lunch break, he found himself wondering about the woman's background, her knowledge of military protocol, her bearing, her way of speaking. None of it fit with her appearance as a homeless person. That afternoon, the base buzzed with rumors. Some said the woman was a foreign spy. Others claimed she was a reporter doing an undercover story. But Marcus, who had been the first to encounter her, knew it was something else entirely. The way Colonel Davis had reacted, the classified nature of the situation, the VIP treatment. It all pointed to something much more significant. As evening approached, Marcus decided to check on the woman. He had a legitimate reason. He was responsible for the initial contact and might be asked for a follow-up report. At least, that's what he told himself as he made his way to Building 7. Staff Sergeant Williams was still on duty when Marcus arrived. "She's been quiet all day," Williams reported. "Ordered a meal from the dining facility, took a shower, but otherwise hasn't left her room. There's been a steady stream of officers coming to see her. Though, officers? Colonel Davis came back twice. Major Chen was here for about an hour. Even General Morrison stopped by, though he didn't stay long." Marcus felt his stomach drop. General Morrison was the base commander, a man who rarely concerned himself with individual personnel issues. If he was personally involved, this situation was bigger than anyone imagined. "Any idea what's going on?" Marcus asked. Williams shook his head. "Above my pay grade, but I'll tell you this much. I've been doing this job for 12 years, and I've never seen officers act the way they have today. They're all nervous, like they're walking on eggshells." As if summoned by their conversation, Colonel Davis appeared in the lobby. His uniform was rumpled, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. Despite the fact that it was only 7 in the evening, "Sergeant Thompson," Davis said, spotting Marcus immediately. They moved to a small office off the main lobby. Davis closed the door and turned to face Marcus with an expression that mixed exhaustion and something that looked almost like fear. "Sergeant, what I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room. The security of this base, possibly of the entire military, depends on your discretion." Marcus straightened to attention. "Yes, sir." Davis took a deep breath. "The woman you found this morning isn't homeless. At least, not in the way we initially thought. We've been making calls all day, trying to confirm her identity, and what we've discovered is unprecedented. Sir, according to the records we've been able to access, that woman served in the military for over 30 years. She held positions of incredible responsibility and had access to some of the most classified information in the Department of Defense." Marcus felt his mouth go dry. "What kind of positions, sir?" Davis hesitated before answering. "The kind that officially don't exist, Sergeant. The kind that people spend their entire careers never knowing about, and now she's here, on our base. In the condition you found her in, and we don't know why." The implications of Davis's words settled over Marcus like a heavy blanket. A high-level intelligence operative, living on the streets, showing up at a military base. It could be a coincidence, but Marcus's training told him there were no coincidences in situations like this. "What do you need from me, sir?" "Tomorrow morning, a team from Washington is flying in. They'll want to debrief you about every detail of your encounter with her. But tonight, I need you to think. Sergeant, think about everything she said, everything she did, any detail that might seem insignificant. Her life, and possibly the lives of others, might depend on it." Marcus nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." "Sir, can I ask what her name is?" Davis was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "According to the classified files we've accessed, her name is Elena Vasquez. But that's not the name that has everyone in Washington in a panic." He paused, looking directly at Marcus. "Her operational code name was Nightingale, and if the records are accurate, Sergeant, Nightingale was supposed to have died 15 years ago." The silence that followed Davis's revelation was deafening. Marcus felt the ground shift beneath him as the implications sank in. A dead operative, walking onto their base alive, homeless, and apparently forgotten by the system she had once served. "Sir," Marcus finally managed, "if she's supposed to be dead, then who has been living on the streets, and why did she come here?" Davis shook his head. "Those are the questions that have everyone terrified, Sergeant. Because if Nightingale is alive, if she's been living homeless for years, then everything we thought we knew about one of our most successful operations might be wrong. And if we're wrong about that," he didn't need to finish the sentence. Marcus understood. In the world of intelligence and covert operations, one mistake could unravel decades of work and put countless lives at risk. As Marcus left Building 7 that evening, his mind raced with questions. The woman, Elena, Nightingale, whoever she really was, had seemed so ordinary despite her unusual bearing. But if Davis was right, she was anything but ordinary. She was a ghost. A person who had supposedly died in service to her country, now returned to the world of the living under circumstances that no one could explain. The base had settled into its evening routine, but Marcus knew that in offices across Washington, people were working through the night, trying to piece together a puzzle that had taken 15 years to reveal itself. And at the center of that puzzle was a homeless woman who had wandered onto his patrol route and turned his routine Tuesday morning into something that would likely change his life forever. As he walked back to his quarters, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Whatever had brought Elena Vasquez to Fort Braxton, whatever secrets she carried with her from her life as Nightingale, the truth was still hidden beneath layers of classification and years of assumed death. But one thing was certain. Tomorrow, when the team from Washington arrived, the real investigation would begin. And Marcus, who had simply been doing his job when he found a homeless woman by the fence, was about to become part of something much larger and more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. The mystery of Nightingale had returned from the dead, and nothing at Fort Braxton would ever be the same again. The black SUVs arrived at Fort Braxton at exactly 0600 hours. their tinted windows reflecting the early morning sun like dark mirrors. Sergeant Marcus Thompson watched from his barracks window as the convoy of 4 vehicles passed through the main gate without the usual security checks. These weren't ordinary visitors. Marcus had barely slept. Colonel Davis's words kept echoing in his mind. Nightingale was supposed to have died 15 years ago. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those startling blue eyes of the homeless woman, Elena Vasquez, studying him with an intelligence that had seemed far too sharp for someone in her condition. His phone buzzed at 0630. Thompson, report to Conference Room A in Building 1, immediately. Bring your patrol log from yesterday. The voice belonged to Major Chen, and she sounded tense. Conference Room A was the largest meeting room on the base, typically used for important briefings and visiting dignitaries. As Marcus approached the building, he noticed the increased security. MPs he didn't recognize stood at strategic positions, and the parking lot was filled with vehicles bearing government plates. Inside the building, the atmosphere was electric with nervous energy. Staff officers moved with quick, purposeful steps, and hushed conversations stopped whenever Marcus passed. He'd never seen the base so tightly wound. Conference Room A had been transformed into something resembling a command center. Multiple laptops sat open on the long table, their screens displaying classified documents and photographs. A large monitor on the wall showed what appeared to be a timeline spanning several decades. At the head of the table sat a woman Marcus didn't recognize. Middle-aged, sharp-eyed, wearing an expensive suit that screamed federal government. Colonel Davis was there, looking even more haggard than he had the night before. Major Chen sat beside him, along with General Morrison, who Marcus had only seen from a distance before this week. But it was the woman in the suit who commanded the room's attention. Sergeant Thompson, she said as Marcus entered, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made generals stand at attention. I'm Director Sarah Walsh, Defense Intelligence Agency. Please, take a seat. Marcus sat in the chair she indicated, suddenly feeling very small in a room full of people whose security clearances probably outranked his pay grade by several levels. Sergeant, Director Walsh continued, yesterday morning you encountered an individual who identified herself as Elena Vasquez. I need you to tell me everything about that encounter, no matter how insignificant it might seem. Marcus pulled out his patrol log and began recounting the events. Walsh listened without interruption, but he noticed her making notes whenever he mentioned specific things Elena had said or done. Other people in the room, he counted at least 8 individuals he didn't recognize, also took detailed notes. You mentioned that she seemed to know her way around the base, Walsh said when Marcus finished. Can you elaborate on that observation? Yes, ma'am. When we walked to headquarters, she never asked for directions. She seemed to know exactly where we were going, and at one point, she made a comment about how the place had changed. Out. Walsh exchanged glances with a man seated to her right, who Marcus now noticed wore the uniform of a Navy captain despite being in an Army base meeting. Changed how? The captain asked. I'm not sure, sir. She said it quietly, almost to herself. But it was like she was comparing what she saw to how she remembered it being. Walsh leaned forward slightly. Sergeant, in your professional opinion, what was your assessment of this individual's mental state and physical condition? Marcus considered the question carefully. Ma'am, physically she was clearly malnourished and appeared to have been living rough for some time. Her clothes were in poor condition, and she had the general appearance of someone who'd been homeless for months, maybe longer. And mentally? That's what was unusual, ma'am. Despite her physical condition, she was extremely alert and aware. Her speech was clear and intelligent. She followed commands without question, but there was something about the way she carried herself. Marcus paused, trying to find the right words. Take your time, Sergeant. She had military bearing, ma'am. Not the kind you see in someone who served briefly years ago, but the kind that becomes part of who you are after decades of service. And when she spoke to me, it was almost like she was humoring me, if that makes sense. Walsh made another note. Humoring you how? No, like she was used to giving orders rather than taking them, but was choosing to cooperate. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, Walsh replied grimly. General Morrison spoke for the first time since Marcus had entered the room. Sergeant, did she seem surprised by anything she saw on the base? Any reaction to specific buildings or locations? Well, sir, she did pause when we reached headquarters. For just a moment, she seemed uncertain. Almost like she was seeing it for the first time but expected it to be different. The Navy captain leaned forward. Different how? I couldn't say, sir. It was just an impression. Director Walsh closed her notebook and looked directly at Marcus. Sergeant Thompson, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. The woman you found yesterday morning was indeed Elena Vasquez. But Elena Vasquez was not her real name. Her real identity is classified, but I can tell you that she was one of our most valuable intelligence assets for over 3 decades. Marcus felt his mouth go dry. Ma'am, Elena Vasquez was a deep cover operative who spent the majority of her career in situations so classified that her existence was known to fewer than 20 people in the entire U.S. government. Her work was critical to national security operations, spanning multiple decades and several continents. The room was completely silent as Walsh continued. 15 years ago, Elena was on assignment in Eastern Europe when her cover was blown. The last communication we received from her indicated that she had been compromised and was attempting to extract herself from the situation. We received intelligence suggesting that she had been captured and executed by hostile forces. After extensive investigation, we concluded that she was dead. Marcus struggled to process this information. But she's not dead, ma'am. No, Sergeant, she's very much alive. And that fact raises questions that have the highest levels of government extremely concerned. Major Chen spoke up for the first time. Sergeant, when you found her, did she seem to recognize the base? Did she act like she had been here before? Marcus thought back to the encounter. Not exactly, sir. But there was something familiar about the way she moved through the space, like she wasn't seeing it for the first time, but maybe hadn't seen it in a very long time. Walsh nodded grimly. That would make sense. Elena was stationed at Fort Braxton early in her career, before she moved to deep cover operations. She would have known this base well, though it was nearly 40 years ago. Ma'am, Marcus asked hesitantly, if she's been alive all this time, where has she been? And why did she come here? Those are the questions that have us so concerned, Sergeant. We have no record of Elena's activities for the past 15 years. As far as the system was concerned, she was dead. She had no official identity, no access to government services, no way to contact us through normal channels. The implications of Walsh's words sank in slowly. A highly trained intelligence operative. Presumed dead. Living on the streets for 15 years, with no official identity or support. Ma'am, Marcus said quietly, are you saying she's been homeless this entire time? We don't know, Sergeant. We're hoping she can tell us. But there's another concern. Walsh paused, and Marcus saw genuine worry in her eyes. Elena had access to some of the most sensitive information in U.S. intelligence. Her knowledge of ongoing operations, foreign assets, and classified technologies was extensive. If she's been compromised during these missing 15 years, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Marcus understood the implications. A highly knowledgeable operative, living without official protection or oversight, potentially exposed to foreign intelligence services or criminal organizations. General Morrison stood up. Sergeant Thompson, you're going to be part of the debriefing team. Elena has agreed to speak with us, but she's specifically requested that you be present during the initial interview. Marcus blinked in surprise. Me? Sir? Why would she request that? We don't know, Walsh replied. But given that you were her first contact after 15 years of being off the grid, she may feel more comfortable with you present. Will you agree to participate? We've not see. Of course, ma'am. Good. The interview will begin in 2 hours. Between now and then, you'll be briefed on Elena's background and the security protocols for this operation. I need to stress, Sergeant, that everything you learn from this point forward is classified at levels you've never encountered before. The wrong word to the wrong person could result in the loss of life. Marcus nodded solemnly. I understand, ma'am. For the next 2 hours, Marcus received a crash course in intelligence operations and classified protocols. He learned about Elena's early career as a military intelligence officer, her recruitment into deep cover operations, and the importance of the missions she had completed over the decades. The picture that emerged was of a remarkable woman who had sacrificed everything for her country. Elena had no family. They had been told she was dead 35 years ago when she went deep cover. She had no friends outside of the intelligence community, no personal relationships that weren't part of her operational identity. She had literally disappeared into her work, becoming a ghost who existed only to serve her country's interests. And then, 15 years ago, she had vanished entirely. When the time came for the interview, Marcus found himself walking back to Building 7 with a team of some of the most senior intelligence officials in the U.S. government. His role was simple: to be present as a familiar face and to observe Elena's reactions to the questions she would be asked. Elena was waiting for them in a conference room that had been secured and equipped with recording equipment. She had showered and been provided with clean clothes, simple military-issue clothing that seemed to suit her much better than the rags she had been wearing. But the change was more than cosmetic. Cleaned up and rested, Elena looked like a completely different person. Her gray hair was neatly combed, and her posture was unmistakably that of a career military officer. But most striking were her eyes. The alertness Marcus had noticed the day before was now focused and intense. This was clearly a woman who had spent decades in situations where attention to detail meant the difference between life and death. Good morning, Elena, Director Walsh said as they entered the room. I'm Director Walsh. We spoke briefly yesterday. Director, Elena replied, her voice strong and clear. Thank you for the accommodations. It's been some time since I've slept in a real bed. The simple statement sent a chill through the room. How long had she been living rough? And why? Elena's eyes found Marcus among the group of officials. Sergeant Thompson. Thank you for your kindness yesterday. Not many soldiers would have shown such courtesy to someone in my condition. Marcus nodded, unsure of how to respond in the presence of so many senior officials. Walsh took a seat across from Elena. Elena, we have a lot of questions, but I want to start with the most basic one. Where have you been for the past 15 years? Elena was quiet for a long moment, her eyes moving around the room, studying each face. When she finally spoke, her words were carefully measured. Director, before I answer any questions, I need to understand something. What did you tell people about my fate after the Prague operation? Walsh exchanged glances with her colleagues. We told them you were killed in action. Your name is on the memorial wall at Langley. A ghost of a smile crossed Elena's face. Killed in action. Yes, I suppose that's accurate in its way. What do you mean? Elena leaned forward slightly. Director, the woman who went to Prague 15 years ago did die there. Elena Vasquez, deep cover operative, died the night her cover was blown. But I didn't die. I just stopped existing. The room was completely silent as Elena continued. When my extraction failed and I realized I was completely on my own, I made a choice. I could try to contact the agency and risk exposing other operations, or I could disappear completely. I chose to disappear. Walsh's voice was tight when she responded. Elena, you had protocols for exactly this situation. There were extraction procedures, emergency contacts, all of which were compromised, Elena replied sharply. Director, the operation that blew my cover wasn't a foreign intelligence service. It was someone inside our own government. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus saw several of the officials exchange alarmed glances. That's a serious accusation, Elena. It's not an accusation, Director. It's a fact. I spent months before Prague gathering evidence of a leak inside the intelligence community. Someone was selling information about our deep cover operatives to foreign services. The Prague mission wasn't about gathering intelligence. It was about identifying the source of the leak. End quote. Elena paused, her eyes hard as steel. I found the source. And 12 hours later, my cover was blown. and a kill team was sent after me. So yes, Director, Elena Vasquez died that night, because trusting the system that had betrayed her would have meant actually dying. Walsh leaned back in her chair, her face pale. Elena, if what you're saying is true, it is true. And I have proof. Elena reached into the pocket of her military-issue jacket and withdrew a small device that Marcus didn't recognize. She placed it on the table, between herself and Walsh. 15 years ago, I was gathering evidence on dead drops, communication methods, and financial transfers. When I realized I'd been betrayed, I downloaded everything onto this device. Names, dates, amounts, methods, everything I'd discovered about the operation that was selling our people to foreign governments. The device sat on the table like a bomb waiting to explode. Marcus could see that everyone in the room understood the implications of what Elena was saying. Why now? Walsh asked quietly. Why surface after 15 years? Elena's expression softened slightly. Because I'm dying, Director. I have maybe 6 months left, and I couldn't take this information to my grave, knowing that the people responsible might still be active. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus watched as some of the most powerful people in U.S. intelligence struggled to process what they had just learned. Elena continued, For 15 years, I've been gathering additional evidence, tracking money flows, watching personnel movements. The network I discovered in Prague wasn't shut down when I disappeared. It adapted and continued operating. She looked directly at Walsh. Director, you have a traitor in your organization, probably more than one, and they've been operating with impunity for decades. Marcus felt like he was watching a dam burst. The homeless woman he had found by the fence wasn't just a lost operative. She was carrying evidence of treason that reached into the highest levels of the U.S. intelligence community. Walsh stood up slowly. Elena, we need to verify everything you're telling us. If you're right, if I'm right, Director, then a lot of people who thought they were safe are about to have their lives turned upside down. Starting with whoever sent that kill team to Prague 15 years ago. Elena picked up the device and held it out to Walsh. Everything you need is on here. But Director, I have conditions for turning over this information. What kind of conditions? Elena's eyes found Marcus again, then moved around the room. I want full immunity for any actions I took during my 15 years off the grid. I want my death reversed in the official records, and I want my military benefits restored. And I want protection. Because once this investigation begins, the people involved will try to silence me permanently. Walsh nodded slowly. Those terms seem reasonable, given what you're offering. There's one more thing, Elena said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I didn't come to Fort Braxton by accident. I've been watching this base for months, waiting for the right opportunity to make contact. Why this base? Elena's smile was grim. Because according to my intelligence, one of the people involved in the network that betrayed me is stationed here. Someone with access to classified information and the authority to influence personnel assignments. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. Elena wasn't just bringing evidence of past treason. She was suggesting that the traitors were still active, still operating, and one of them was right here at Fort Braxton. The room erupted into hushed but urgent conversations as the officials realized that their investigation had just become exponentially more dangerous and complex. They weren't just dealing with historical evidence. They were potentially sitting in the same building as an active traitor who had been operating for 15 years. Elena sat calmly in the middle of the chaos, watching the reactions around her with the practiced eye of someone who had spent decades reading people's true motivations. The homeless woman who had wandered onto the base was gone, replaced by one of the most experienced intelligence operatives in U.S. history, and she was just getting started. The tension in conference room A was thick enough to cut with a knife. Director Walsh held Elena's device like it might explode at any moment, while the other officials whispered urgently among themselves. Marcus Thompson sat in stunned silence, trying to process the revelation that someone at Fort Braxton might be a traitor who had been operating for 15 years. Elena Vasquez watched the chaos she had unleashed with the calm demeanor of someone who had seen much worse. Her transformation from homeless woman to seasoned intelligence operative was complete, and Marcus could now see why she had been so valuable to the government for 3 decades. "Ladies and gentlemen," Director Walsh called for order, her voice cutting through the whispered conversations. "We need to establish protocols immediately. If Elena's intelligence is accurate, we're dealing with an active security threat on this base." General Morrison, who had been unusually quiet since Elena's revelations, finally spoke up. "Director Walsh, with respect, how do we know this woman is who she claims to be? She's been missing for 15 years. For all we know, she could be a foreign operative, using Elena Vasquez's identity." Elena smiled at the general's skepticism. "A reasonable question, General. Director Walsh, may I assume you've already run biometric verification on my fingerprints and retinal scan?" Walsh nodded. "Completed 2 hours ago. The results confirm your identity as Elena Maria Vasquez, though officially you've been listed as deceased since 2009. Then perhaps this will provide additional verification," Elena said, reaching into her other pocket. She withdrew a small metal object that Marcus initially thought was a coin, but as she placed it on the table, he could see it was some kind of medallion or token. The Navy captain Marcus had noticed earlier immediately leaned forward, his face going pale. "Where did you get that?" "You should recognize it, Captain Rodriguez," Elena replied calmly. "You gave it to me in Sarajevo in 1995. Along with instructions for the extraction of the Russian defector. The operation that officially never happened." Captain Rodriguez stared at the medallion, then at Elena, his mouth slightly open. "My God. Elena, we thought you were dead when the reports came in from Prague. Elena, we thought you were dead. The reports were accurate, Captain. The woman you knew died in Prague. But I survived, and I've been gathering evidence ever since." Director Walsh interrupted the reunion. "Elena, you mentioned that you believe one of the traitors is stationed here at Fort Braxton. Can you be more specific?" Elena's expression grew serious. "Based on my investigation, someone with administrative access to personnel files and security clearances has been providing information about military intelligence operations to foreign contacts. This person has been using their position to identify potential targets for recruitment and to warn hostile services about ongoing operations." Major Chen leaned forward. "That's an extremely serious accusation. Do you have proof?" Elena nodded. "On the device I've given you, you'll find financial records showing payments from known front organizations to a bank account registered under a false identity. The account was accessed multiple times from computers on this base over the past 2 years." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Someone at Fort Braxton had been actively betraying their country, and Elena had the evidence to prove it. "Elena," General Morrison said slowly, "if you've had this evidence, why didn't you come forward sooner?" Elena's eyes hardened. "General, the last time I trusted the system, I ended up hunted through the streets of Prague by people who wanted me dead. I spent 15 years making sure I had enough evidence to prove my claims beyond any doubt, and enough leverage to ensure my survival once I came forward." "Leverage?" Walsh asked. Elena smiled grimly. "Director, did you really think I would walk onto a military base and hand over 15 years of intelligence work without insurance? The device I gave you contains about 30% of the evidence I've gathered. The rest is safely stored in multiple locations, with instructions for its release if anything happens to me." Marcus watched as the government officials realized they were dealing with someone who had spent 15 years thinking like a fugitive. Elena hadn't just survived. She had prepared for every possible scenario. "What do you want from us?" Walsh asked. "I want the traitors identified and arrested. I want the network they've been feeding information to dismantled. And I want to make sure that what happened to me never happens to another operative." Elena paused, her gaze moving around the room. "But first, we need to secure this base. The person I've identified as being involved in the network knows I'm here. They saw me brought in yesterday, and they've had over 24 hours to realize that their operation might be compromised." Captain Rodriguez spoke up. "Elena, How do we know this person won't try to eliminate you before we can complete the investigation? Because, Captain, they don't know how much evidence I have or where it's stored. Killing me now would guarantee the release of everything I've gathered, including information that would expose operations they're not even aware I know about. Elena stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the base. Besides, they're not stupid. A sudden death or disappearance of the homeless woman who wandered onto the base would draw exactly the kind of attention they want to avoid. Marcus found his voice for the first time since the revelations had begun. Ma'am, if this person has been operating here for years, how did you identify them specifically? Elena turned from the window. Excellent question, Sergeant. I identified them through a combination of financial forensics and behavioral analysis. The payments I mentioned corresponded with specific personnel decisions that could only have been made by someone with access to classified assignment information. She moved back to the table and sat down. Over the past 2 years, 7 military intelligence operatives were assigned to positions where their work was subsequently compromised by foreign services. In each case, the compromise occurred within weeks of their assignment. The common factor was that all 7 assignments were processed through the personnel office here at Fort Braxton. Major Chen's face had gone white. Elena, the personnel office processes thousands of assignments every year. How does that narrow it down to a specific individual? Because, Major, of the 43 people who had access to those specific assignment files, only one also had the computer access logs that matched the times when the foreign payments were received. Only one person was logged into the classified systems at the exact times when the intelligence would have been transmitted. Elena reached for the device Walsh was still holding. May I? Walsh hesitated, then slid the device across the table. Elena pressed a series of buttons, and numbers appeared on a small screen. The evidence shows a pattern spanning 14 months. Every third Thursday of the month, between 2:15 and 2:45 a.m., someone accessed classified personnel files from a terminal in Building 12. The same nights, significant deposits appeared in the offshore account. General Morrison leaned forward. Building 12 houses the personnel administrative offices. Exactly. And according to base security logs, only 5 people had after-hours access to that building during the time frame in question. Of those 5, only one also had the clearance level necessary to access the specific files that were compromised. The room was completely silent as Elena delivered her conclusion. Ladies and gentlemen, based on 15 years of investigation and irrefutable digital evidence, the traitor you're looking for is Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, Deputy Chief of Personnel Operations. Marcus felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell was a respected officer with over 20 years of service. She was known for her efficiency and attention to detail, qualities that apparently had made her an effective spy as well as a military administrator. Director Walsh was already on her phone, speaking in urgent, hushed tones. When she ended the call, she looked around the room with grim determination. Elena, based on your intelligence, we're initiating immediate containment protocols. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell will be taken into custody within the hour, and all personnel associated with her office will be questioned. Director, Elena cautioned, I would recommend extreme care in how you handle this arrest. If Mitchell realizes she's been discovered, she may attempt to warn her handlers or destroy evidence. What do you suggest? Elena considered for a moment. A routine security inspection would provide cover for searching her office and seizing her computer equipment. Once you have her digital files, you can make the arrest without giving her time to react. Captain Rodriguez nodded approvingly. That's good operational thinking, Elena. You haven't lost your edge. 15 years of staying ahead of intelligence services from 6 different countries tends to keep one sharp. Captain, over the next hour, Marcus watched as a carefully orchestrated operation unfolded around him. Teams of federal agents, working under the cover of a routine security audit, began systematically searching Building 12. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell, unaware that her years of treason had been discovered, cooperated fully with what she believed was a standard inspection. Elena remained in the conference room, providing real-time guidance to the search teams through an encrypted communication system. Her knowledge of intelligence-gathering techniques and digital forensics was invaluable as the investigators worked to secure evidence without alerting their target. They've found encrypted files on her personal computer, Director Walsh reported after receiving an update from the search team. Files that don't appear in any official database. Elena nodded. Those will be her insurance policies and backup plans. Every good spy keeps evidence that could incriminate their handlers, just in case they need leverage. How much more evidence do you have on this network? Walsh asked. Director. Mitchell was just one piece of a much larger operation. The evidence I've gathered indicates that this network has been active for at least 25 years, possibly longer. They've compromised operations across multiple agencies and branches of the military. Elena stood and began pacing, her years of operational experience evident in her controlled movements. The people running this network are sophisticated and patient. They recruit carefully. They compartmentalize their operations, and they've managed to stay below the radar by keeping their activities just small enough to avoid triggering security reviews. Major Chen spoke up. Elena, if this network is as extensive as you suggest, how do we know we can trust anyone in this room? Elena stopped pacing and looked directly at Major Chen. Major, that's exactly the right question to ask. The truth is, until we've completely mapped this network, we can't be certain about anyone. The implication hung in the air like a dark cloud. If the network was as extensive as Elena suggested, there could be other traitors in positions of authority throughout the military and intelligence communities. However, Elena continued, I have been watching this base and its personnel for months. Based on my observations and the evidence I've gathered, I'm confident that everyone in this room is clean. How can you be sure? General Morrison asked. Elena smiled. General, if any of you were part of the network, I wouldn't have made it past the front gate yesterday. My appearance here would have triggered immediate action to neutralize me before I could make contact with legitimate authorities. Marcus realized that Elena's decision to approach the base as a homeless woman hadn't been random or desperate. It had been a carefully calculated test to determine who could be trusted. Director Walsh's phone buzzed with an urgent message. After reading it, she looked up with grim satisfaction. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell has been taken into custody. She's being transported to a secure facility for questioning. Elena nodded approvingly. Director, I would recommend that you keep her location classified, even from people with appropriate clearances. The network she was part of has resources and connections that we're still mapping. Already done. Elena, we're going to need you to work closely with our investigators over the next several weeks. Will you be willing to do that? Director, I've spent 15 years preparing for this moment. I'm not going anywhere. As the afternoon wore on, more evidence emerged from the search of Mitchell's office and digital files. Computer specialists found hidden directories containing classified documents that she had no legitimate reason to possess. Financial investigators discovered the offshore accounts Elena had identified, along with additional accounts that suggested the scope of the operation was even larger than initially thought. But perhaps most importantly, they found communication logs that revealed Mitchell had been in contact with foreign intelligence services as recently as the previous week. Elena reviewed each piece of evidence with the practiced eye of someone who understood the significance of every detail. Her commentary and analysis helped the investigators understand not just what they had found, but how it fit into the larger pattern of espionage and treason she had been tracking. Director, Elena said as the day's briefings concluded, I need to warn you about something. The arrest of Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell is going to send shockwaves through the network. They'll assume she's been compromised and will begin implementing contingency plans. What kind of contingency plans? They'll start destroying evidence, severing communications, and possibly eliminating people who know too much. We have maybe 48 hours before they complete their damage control operations. Walsh looked alarmed. Elena, are you saying other people are in danger? Elena nodded grimly. Director, based on the evidence I've gathered, this network has operated for decades by eliminating anyone who posed a threat to their security. They've made several murders look like accidents or suicides. She paused, letting the implications sink in. If we're going to roll up this entire operation, we need to move fast and move simultaneously against multiple targets. Otherwise, we'll be left with one low-level operative and a lot of missing evidence. Director Walsh stood up, her expression determined. Elena, I'm authorizing a joint task force with representatives from all affected agencies. You'll be our primary consultant on this operation. I accept, Director. But I have one request. What's that? Elena looked at Marcus Thompson, who had been quietly observing the day's events. I want Sergeant Thompson assigned to the task force as well. Marcus nearly choked. Ma'am, I'm just a patrol sergeant. I don't have the clearance or experience for this kind of operation. Elena smiled. Sergeant, yesterday you showed kindness and professionalism to someone you thought was just a homeless woman. That tells me more about your character than any security clearance ever could. Besides, you were the first person I made contact with after 15 years in the shadows. I'd like you to be part of seeing this through to the end. Director Walsh considered the request. Sergeant Thompson, are you willing to accept a temporary assignment to a joint intelligence task force? I should warn you that it will involve significant personal risk and exposure to classified information that will change your military career permanently. Marcus looked around the room at the faces of some of the most senior intelligence officials in the U.S. government, then at Elena, whose blue eyes held a mixture of determination and something that might have been hope. Yes, ma'am. I accept. Elena nodded approvingly. Good. Because, Sergeant, what we've accomplished today is just the beginning. Now comes the really dangerous part. Finally, Nidram, as the sun set over Fort Braxton, Marcus Thompson realized that his routine patrol the previous morning had led him into the middle of one of the most significant counterintelligence operations in U.S. history, and somehow, a homeless woman with the bearing of a career soldier had become the key to unraveling decades of treason that reached into the highest levels of the military and intelligence communities. The woman who had been forgotten by the system she served was about to bring down the network that had betrayed her and countless others. And Marcus, who had simply been doing his job when he found her by the fence, was going to help her do it. The real war was just beginning. The secure facility where the Joint Task Force established their operations center was unlike anything Sergeant Marcus Thompson had ever seen. Located in an underground complex beneath Fort Braxton, the facility had been built during the Cold War and maintained for exactly this type of sensitive operation. Elena Vasquez stood before a wall-sized display showing a complex web of connections, financial transactions, and personnel movements spanning 25 years. Her transformation from homeless woman to intelligence analyst was complete, and Marcus marveled at how she commanded the room despite officially being dead for 15 years. Ladies and gentlemen, Elena addressed the assembled task force, which now included representatives from the FBI, CIA, DIA, and NSA. What you're looking at is the most sophisticated and long-running espionage network in modern American history. Director Walsh stood beside Elena, pointing to various elements of the display. Based on Elena's intelligence and the evidence we've gathered from Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's files, we've identified at least 37 individuals who may be part of this network. Marcus studied the display, trying to understand the scope of what they were dealing with. Red lines connected faces, bank accounts, classified operations, and foreign contacts in a pattern that looked like a spider's web stretching across decades and multiple continents. The network operates through a cell structure, Elena continued, using a laser pointer to highlight different sections of the display. Each cell knows only enough to perform its specific function, but the leadership coordinates activities across all cells to maximize intelligence gathering while minimizing exposure. Captain Rodriguez, who had been studying the financial data, looked up with concern. Elena, the money flows you've documented suggest this network has generated hundreds of millions of dollars over the past 2 decades. What are they doing with that kind of funding? Elena's expression grew grim. Captain, that's where this operation becomes truly dangerous. They're not just selling intelligence. They're using their profits to fund additional penetration of U.S. security services. They're buying sources, establishing front companies, and creating an infrastructure that allows them to operate with near impunity. Major Chen, who had been assigned to the task force despite her initial skepticism, pointed to a section of the display showing recent activities. Elena, these financial transfers from the past 6 months are enormous. What triggered such a sudden increase in activity? Major, they've been preparing for exactly this situation. The network leadership knew that eventually someone would discover their operation, so they've been accelerating their activities to extract maximum intelligence before they need to shut down. Elena moved to a different section of the display, showing personnel assignments and security clearances. But more concerning is what they've been doing with the intelligence they've gathered. Look at these patterns. She highlighted a series of operations that had been compromised over the past 5 years, showing how the timing of each compromise corresponded with personnel decisions made by people connected to the network. They haven't just been selling information to foreign governments. They've been actively sabotaging U.S. operations by ensuring that our most sensitive missions are exposed to hostile intelligence services. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. This wasn't just espionage. It was systematic sabotage of American national security. General Morrison, who had been reviewing classified files on a secure tablet, looked up with obvious concern. Elena, according to these records, some of the operations that were compromised resulted in the deaths of U.S. personnel. Are you saying this network is responsible for the murders of American service members? Elena nodded slowly. General, based on my analysis, at least 17 American soldiers, sailors, airmen, and intelligence operatives have died as a direct result of information provided by this network to hostile forces. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Marcus watched as career intelligence professionals, people who had seen the worst humanity had to offer, struggled to process the magnitude of the betrayal they were investigating. Director Walsh's phone buzzed with an urgent message. After reading it, she looked up with a mixture of satisfaction and concern. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell is talking. She's provided information that confirms much of Elena's intelligence. But she's also revealed something we didn't know. Elena tensed. What kind of something? She claims that the network has placed operatives in critical positions throughout the defense establishment, including personnel with access to nuclear weapons systems and strategic defense information. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, as if confirming her worst fears. Director, that's consistent with what I suspected, but couldn't prove. The network's ultimate goal isn't just to steal intelligence. It's to position itself to influence or sabotage critical U.S. defense capabilities. Captain Rodriguez stood up abruptly. Elena, are you suggesting this network could compromise our nuclear deterrent? Captain, I'm not suggesting it. I'm stating it as a fact. The evidence I've gathered indicates that at least 3 people with access to nuclear command and control systems have received payments from accounts controlled by this network. The room erupted into urgent conversations as the officials realized they were dealing with a threat to national security of unprecedented scope. Marcus, who had been quietly observing the proceedings, finally spoke up. Ma'am, if this network is as dangerous as you say, and if they know their operation has been compromised, what's to stop them from activating whatever assets they have in place? Elena looked at Marcus with obvious approval. Sergeant, that's exactly the right question. And it's why we need to move immediately against all known and suspected members of this network. She turned to address the entire room. Ladies and gentlemen, we have perhaps 12 hours before the network realizes that Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's arrest was not routine. Once they understand that their operation has been exposed, they will begin implementing contingency plans that could result in significant damage to U.S. national security. Director Walsh was already coordinating with other agencies through multiple secure communication channels. Elena, we're preparing simultaneous operations against suspected network members in 17 different locations. But we need your assessment of who should be prioritized. Elena moved back to the display and began highlighting specific individuals. These 6 people have access to information that could compromise ongoing operations in critical regions. They need to be contained immediately. She moved to another section. These 4 individuals have administrative access to personnel systems and could begin deleting or altering records to cover the network's activities. Finally, she highlighted 3 faces at the top of the display. And these 3 people appear to be the operational leadership of the entire network. They have the authority to order the destruction of evidence and the elimination of anyone who might testify against them. Marcus studied the faces Elena had highlighted, realizing that one of them looked familiar. "Ma'am, that woman in the upper right. I've seen her before." Elena and Director Walsh both turned to look at the face Marcus was indicating. "Where did you see her, Sergeant?" Walsh asked. Marcus concentrated, trying to remember. "She was at the base 2 days ago, visiting the communications center. I remember because she didn't sign in through the normal visitor procedures. She went directly to the secure areas, like she had permanent access." Elena's face went pale. "Sergeant, are you certain about this?" "Yes, ma'am. I remember thinking it was unusual, but she was with Colonel Davis and seemed to have appropriate authorization." Elena and Walsh exchanged alarmed looks. Elena quickly moved to another terminal and began typing rapidly. "Director, if this woman was at Fort Braxton 2 days ago, then the network knows about my contact with the base. They may have been monitoring the situation since I was first brought in. The implications hit everyone at once. If the network leadership knew about Elena's reappearance, they had already begun implementing their contingency plans." Director Walsh was immediately on the phone, coordinating with security teams across multiple facilities. When she finished her calls, she turned back to the group with obvious urgency. "Elena, we've just learned that 3 of our priority targets have disappeared within the past 6 hours. Their homes are empty, their offices have been cleared out, and their official travel records show no recent activity." Elena nodded grimly. "They're running, which means they're also destroying evidence and possibly eliminating anyone who might compromise them." Captain Rodriguez looked up from his own secure communication device. "Elena, we're receiving reports of unusual activity at several military installations. Personnel files are being accessed and downloaded at rates far exceeding normal administrative needs. They're identifying everyone who might have been exposed to their operation." Elena replied. "Director, you need to immediately place protective details on anyone who has had access to information about this investigation." As if summoned by her words, alarms began sounding throughout the facility. Red lights flashed, and automated voices announced a security alert. Major Chen was monitoring base security communications. "We have reports of an attempted breach at Building 7, where Elena was staying. Security teams are responding." Elena moved quickly to a secure terminal and began accessing base security cameras. On the screen, Marcus could see armed figures in tactical gear moving through the corridors of Building 7 with military precision. "Director," Elena said calmly, despite the chaos around her, "that's not a random attack. Those are professionals, and they're looking for something specific." "Looking for what?" Elena's smile was grim. "They think I'm still staying in those quarters. They're trying to eliminate me before I can provide more information about their operation." Director Walsh coordinated with base security as the tactical situation unfolded. "Elena, our security teams have the building surrounded, but these intruders seem to know the layout extremely well. Because they've had people inside this base for years," Elena replied. "Director, I recommend you consider the possibility that some of your security personnel may be compromised." As if to confirm her suspicions, one of the secure communication channels crackled with an urgent report. "Control, this is Team 3. We've encountered heavy resistance from individuals with detailed knowledge of our tactical procedures. These aren't random intruders. They're operating with inside information." Elena moved to the central control panel and began typing rapidly. "Director, I'm implementing emergency protocols I established during my years off the grid. We need to assume that normal communication channels are compromised." She turned to address the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you're witnessing is the network's endgame. They're attempting to eliminate witnesses and destroy evidence before we can complete our investigation." Marcus watched as some of the most senior intelligence officials in the United States found themselves under attack by the very network they had been investigating. The scope and sophistication of the enemy they faced was becoming clear. "Elena," Director Walsh said urgently, "if they're willing to attack a military installation directly, what else might they be capable of?" Elena's response was interrupted by another alarm. This one was different. A deep, penetrating tone that Marcus had heard only during the most serious security drills. Major Chen looked up from her communications panel, her face pale. "Director, we're receiving reports of simultaneous attacks on classified facilities in Virginia, Maryland, and Colorado. This isn't just about eliminating Elena. They're trying to destroy the entire investigation." Elena moved to the main display and began typing commands. The screen changed to show a real-time map of the United States, with red indicators appearing at multiple locations. "Director, the network is implementing what we call a scorched earth protocol. They're destroying everything that might connect them to their espionage activities, regardless of the collateral damage." Captain Rodriguez studied the display with growing alarm. "Elena, some of these locations house critical defense infrastructure. If they succeed in damaging these facilities, Captain, that's exactly the point. They're not just trying to escape justice. They're trying to inflict maximum damage to U.S. security capabilities on their way out." Director Walsh coordinated responses with multiple agencies, while Elena continued to analyze the developing situation. Marcus found himself in the unique position of being the lowest-ranking person in a room full of senior officials dealing with a national security crisis of unprecedented scope. "Elena," Marcus said during a brief lull in the activity, "how do we stop them?" Elena looked at him with the same respect she had shown from their first meeting. "Sergeant, that's the right question again. And the answer is that we use their own tactics against them." She moved back to the main display and began highlighting different elements of the network structure. For 25 years, this network has operated by staying in the shadows and avoiding direct confrontation. But now they've been forced into the open, and that changes the entire dynamic of the operation. Elena's eyes held the same sharp intelligence that Marcus had noticed when she was still pretending to be homeless. "Director, ladies and gentlemen, the network just made their first major tactical error in decades. By attacking us directly, they've revealed capabilities and resources that we can now track and target." She turned to face the room with the confidence of someone who had spent 15 years preparing for exactly this moment. "It's time to turn the hunters into the hunted." As alerts continued to sound and reports came in from across the country, Marcus realized that the homeless woman he had found by the fence had led them all into the middle of a shadow war that had been raging for decades. But now, for the first time, the people fighting for American security had a chance to win. The final battle was about to begin. The underground command center at Fort Braxton had been transformed into a war room. Multiple screens displayed real-time intelligence from across the United States as federal agents, military personnel, and intelligence operatives coordinated the largest counter-espionage operation in American history. Elena Vasquez stood at the center of it all. No longer the homeless woman who had wandered onto the base 3 days earlier, but revealed as one of the most experienced intelligence operatives in U.S. history. Her 15 years in the shadows had prepared her for this moment, and Sergeant Marcus Thompson watched in amazement as she orchestrated a response to the network that had betrayed her decades ago. "Director Walsh," Elena called out, reviewing the latest intelligence reports. "The pattern of attacks confirms what I suspected. The network isn't just trying to destroy evidence. They're attempting to cripple our intelligence capabilities permanently." Director Walsh coordinated with multiple agencies through secure communication channels. "Elena, we've successfully apprehended 12 suspected network members in the past 6 hours, but the leadership is still evading capture." Elena moved to the main display, which showed a real-time map of operations across the country. Red indicators marked locations where the network was attempting to destroy evidence or eliminate witnesses, while blue indicators showed successful federal operations to secure assets and arrest suspects. "Director, look at the geographical pattern of their activities," Elena said, using a laser pointer to highlight specific areas. "They're not operating randomly. They're following predetermined escape routes and destroying assets in a specific sequence." Captain Rodriguez, who had been analyzing financial intelligence, looked up from his secure terminal. "Elena, the offshore accounts you identified are being systematically emptied. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars being transferred to accounts in non-extradition countries." "That's expected, Captain. But more importantly, Those financial transfers are providing us with real-time tracking of their movements. Elena moved to another terminal and began typing rapidly. Every electronic transaction leaves a digital footprint, and after 15 years of studying their methods, I know exactly what to look for. Major Chen monitored communications from federal agents in the field. Elena, our teams are reporting that the network operatives they've encountered are extremely well-trained and heavily armed. Several of our agents have been wounded, and one facility in Colorado is under siege. Elena's expression grew grim. Major, that's because this network has been using their intelligence profits to recruit and train military-grade personnel. They're not just spies. They're a private army with access to classified information about our defensive capabilities. General Morrison, who had been coordinating with Pentagon officials, approached Elena with obvious concern. Elena, we've discovered that the network had operatives with access to nuclear command and control systems. We've implemented emergency protocols to change all access codes and communication frequencies, but we need to know what information might have been compromised. Elena pulled up classified files on her terminal, her security clearance having been fully restored for the duration of the operation. General, based on the evidence I've gathered, the network has been collecting information about our nuclear deterrent capabilities for at least 8 years. They have detailed knowledge of our response protocols, command structures, and communication systems. The implications hung heavy in the air. If a hostile network had detailed knowledge of America's nuclear capabilities, the entire foundation of national security had been compromised. However, Elena continued, they've made a critical error in their endgame strategy. By attacking us directly and attempting to destroy evidence, they've revealed capabilities that allow us to track them in ways they don't realize. Director Walsh moved closer to Elena's workstation. What do you mean? Quote, Elena pulled up a series of communication intercepts and digital forensic reports. Director, during their attacks on our facilities, the network has been using communication equipment and tactical procedures that were developed for classified U.S. military operations. Equipment that should only be available to authorized personnel. Captain Rodriguez understood immediately. Elena, are you saying they've been stealing military equipment as well as intelligence? More than that, Captain. They've been developing their own parallel infrastructure using stolen technology and intelligence, but that infrastructure has vulnerabilities they don't know we can exploit. Elena moved to the main display and began entering commands. The screen changed to show a network diagram displaying communication nodes, financial transfers, and personnel movements in real time. Ladies and gentlemen, for the past 15 years, I haven't just been gathering evidence of their past activities, I've been mapping their current operations and identifying weaknesses in their security. Marcus watched in amazement as Elena revealed the scope of her preparation. She hadn't just survived 15 years off the grid, she had been conducting her own intelligence operation against the network that had betrayed her. Elena, Marcus said, you've been planning this for 15 years? Elena looked at him with the same mixture of respect and approval she had shown since their first meeting. Sergeant, when someone tries to kill you and destroys your entire life, you have two choices. You can disappear and try to forget, or you can spend every day preparing for the moment when you can fight back. She turned back to the display, where new information was appearing in real time. I chose to fight back. And now we have the tools to dismantle this network completely. Director Walsh's secure phone rang with an urgent call from Washington. After a brief conversation, she turned back to the room with news that changed everything. Elena, I've just received authorization from the highest levels of government to implement Operation Nightfall. We have presidential authorization to use any means necessary to neutralize this threat. Elena nodded approvingly. Director, I've been developing contingency plans for exactly this scenario. We can turn their own infrastructure against them, but we need to move simultaneously against all remaining operatives. Over the next 2 hours, Marcus watched as Elena coordinated the most complex counterintelligence operation in American history. Using her detailed knowledge of the network's methods and the intelligence she had gathered over 15 years, she guided federal agents to locations where network operatives were attempting to destroy evidence or escape the country. The operation unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. As network members attempted to implement their escape plans, they found federal agents waiting for them at airports, safe houses, and communication centers. Financial accounts they thought were secure were frozen. Escape routes they had prepared for years were blocked. Elena, Major Chen reported, monitoring field operations. We've successfully apprehended 17 additional network members, including 2 of the operational leaders you identified. Elena studied the incoming reports with satisfaction. Major, that leaves only one primary target still at large. The person who has been coordinating the entire network for the past decade. Director Walsh looked up from her communications panel. Do we know who that is? Elena moved to her terminal and pulled up a classified file that made everyone in the room go silent. The photograph showed a distinguished-looking woman in her 50s, wearing the uniform of a senior military officer. Ladies and gentlemen, meet Brigadier General Patricia Morrison, currently assigned to the Pentagon's Strategic Planning Division. She has been the operational commander of this espionage network for 12 years. General Morrison, who had been coordinating military aspects of the operation, stared at the photograph in shock. Elena, that's my wife. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus watched as General Morrison struggled to process the revelation that his wife of 25 years had been one of the most dangerous traitors in American history. Elena's voice was gentle but firm. General, I'm sorry. I know this is devastating. But the evidence is irrefutable. Your wife has been using her position and your access to classified information to coordinate espionage activities that have resulted in the deaths of American service members. General Morrison sat down heavily, his face pale. Elena, how long have you known? I've suspected for 8 months, but I couldn't prove it until we arrested Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell and gained access to the network's communication records. Your wife was very careful. But 15 years of investigation eventually revealed the pattern. Director Walsh coordinated with federal agents who were moving to apprehend Brigadier General Morrison. Elena, she's not at the Pentagon or at her home. Do you have any idea where she might go? Elena consulted her files and pulled up a series of property records and financial transactions. Director, the network maintained several safe houses for exactly this type of situation. Based on the communication intercepts we've gathered, I believe she's at a facility in Virginia that was purchased through a front company 3 years ago. Within an hour, federal agents had surrounded the Virginia safe house. The operation was broadcast live to the command center, where Elena and the task force watched as the final chapter of the investigation unfolded. Brigadier General Patricia Morrison surrendered without resistance, perhaps realizing that her 15-year operation had finally been exposed by someone she had tried to kill decades earlier. As she was taken into custody, Elena closed the files on her computer and turned to address the room. Ladies and gentlemen, the immediate threat has been neutralized. We have successfully apprehended 31 members of the espionage network, frozen over $400 million in assets, and secured classified information that will allow us to identify and protect intelligence sources who were at risk. Director Walsh stood to address the assembled task force. Elena, on behalf of the United States government, I want to thank you for your 15 years of sacrifice and your dedication to exposing this threat to national security. Elena's response was characteristically modest. Director, I did what any operative would do when betrayed by the system they served. I found a way to fight back. I did what anyone. I found a way to fight back. She turned to look at Marcus Thompson, who had been part of the operation from the beginning. But I couldn't have done this alone. Sergeant Thompson, your professionalism and integrity made this operation possible. You treated a homeless woman with kindness and respect, never knowing that your actions would help save American lives. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the events of the past few days. Ma'am, I was just doing my job. Elena smiled. Sergeant, sometimes doing your job with honor and integrity is the most important contribution anyone can make to their country's security. End quote. Number 2. Over the following days, the full scope of the network's activities became clear. Elena's intelligence had exposed an espionage operation that had compromised hundreds of classified operations over 25 years. The arrests and seizures prevented the network from causing additional damage to American national security. Elena Vasquez, the woman who had been officially dead for 15 years, was quietly,